Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us for our webinar. On behalf of Research Nova Scotia, welcome to our webinar for the Spring 2026 Ear to the Ground Research Investments Competition, or E2G. My name is Megan Belfontaine. I'm the Director of Research Support here at Research Nova Scotia, and I'll be your host for this session. Today's session is intended to help potential applicants better understand what E2G is designed to achieve, how Research Nova Scotia evaluates alignment and impact, what strong EOIs look like, and how to structure a proposal around economic outcomes, end users, and real-world adoption. This webinar is focused specifically on the expression of interest stage. Throughout the session, we will reference two key documents for E2G, the E2G EOI Handbook and the Research Nova Scotia Statement of Purpose. Both of these documents are linked at the top of the E2G landing page on our website, and I strongly encourage you to take the time to read through both of them thoroughly before submitting your EOI proposal. Much of the language you'll hear here today comes from those documents because they are the foundation of how the program is designed and assessed. So let's begin by talking about what makes E2G fundamentally different from a traditional research funding program. Before we discuss the application itself, we first need to establish the investment model behind E2G. Everything in the application, the questions, the assessment criteria, and the overall structure is built around this core philosophy. E2G is not simply funding research activity. It is investing in research as a mechanism for generating measurable economic outcomes for Nova Scotia. This slide represents the full E2G engine. It is designed as a connected system where each component supports the next. At the foundation are what we like to call the 5 pillars of research. To be eligible for E2G, projects must clearly involve research that is novel, creative, uncertain, systematic, and transferable. This comes from the Research Nova Scotia definition of research, which is aligned with the OECD for Scotty Manual. But research quality alone is not enough. E2G is specifically focused on projects that can generate measurable economic outcomes for Nova Scotia. The program prioritizes 3 primary economic outcomes, which are market creation or growth, productivity gains, or policy or regulatory improvement. Strong projects also demonstrate alignment to one of Nova Scotia's priority sectors, a credible pathway to impact, clear end user demand, and sector building potential beyond a single organization. One of the most important ideas in E2G is that research is the engine, but economic impact is the purpose. That distinction shapes the entire program. We'll go over each of the sections of this engine over the next several slides. This slide highlights one of the most important mindset shifts applicants need to make. Traditional academic grants often begin with scientific curiosity or a knowledge gap. The primary driver is usually the researcher's interests, and the endpoint is frequently publications, academic advancement, or future research opportunities. But E2G works a little differently. E2G begins with a sector-level economic problem or opportunity in Nova Scotia. The driver is demand, specifically end-user demand, and the endpoint is not publication. The endpoint is real-world use, uptake, and measurable economic growth. Now, this doesn't mean that publications are bad. It also doesn't mean that scientific excellence is unimportant. What it means is that scientific excellence alone is not sufficient for alignment with E2G. Applicants need to demonstrate how research outputs move into and use and ultimately contribute to economic outcomes. That's the core lens through which E2G proposals are assessed. This slide introduces another very important distinction, which is outputs versus outcomes. During the project window, which can range from 6 to 36 months, the research team is conducting research activities and generating outputs. Outputs might include data, technology, tools, reports, prototypes, methods, evidence bases, or frameworks. But E2G is ultimately interested in what happens after the project. The program recognizes that economic impact often occurs beyond the funded research period. What matters is whether there's a clear, credible, and documented pathway from those outputs into real-world adoption and economic outcomes. That is why the handbook emphasizes the economic impact does not need to occur during the project itself. However, applicants must clearly explain Who will use the outputs, how adoption will occur, what steps happen after the project, and how that eventually leads to measurable economic change in Nova Scotia. This is what we mean by the pathway to impact. The Minister's Provincial Research Priorities for Research Nova Scotia defines what the government expects to achieve through research investment. As a result, all E2G funded projects must identify one primary economic outcome. The three eligible primary outcomes are, first, market creation or growth. This refers to increased economic value through new products, services, value chains, or market expansion. Second is productivity gains. This refers to improved efficiency, effectiveness, or outputs relative to resources like labor, time, capital, materials, or energy. And third is policy or regulatory improvement. This refers to improved standards, regulation, procurement, public guidance, or policy implementation that reduces uncertainty, improves market functions, or enables market growth. Applicants may also reference optional secondary outcomes. These include workforce skill development and funding leverage. However, secondary outcomes should strengthen the pathway to impact, not replace the primary economic outcome. One of the most common weaknesses we see applicants discussing broad social or academic benefits without clearly identifying the economic outcome. E2G requires applicants to make that connection explicit. This slide shows the ideal narrative flow of a strong E2G proposal. Strong submissions present a clear, unbroken line of sight from the initial problem to the final economic outcome. The sequence looks like this. First, you want to identify a meaningful sector challenge or opportunity. Second, describe the research activities that will generate new knowledge or solutions. Third, identify the outputs that will be produced. Fourth, explain how end users will adopt or implement those outputs. And finally, explain the resulting economic outcomes. The key idea here is continuity. Each stage should logically connect to the next. Reviewers should be able to clearly understand why the research matters, why research is needed, and who will use the results and how the economic value will eventually be created. If any step in this chain is weak or missing, the pathway to impact becomes much less credible. E2G is also aligned to three priority sectors: natural resources, climate change, and clean energy, life sciences and human sciences, and construction and transportation. However, one of the most important points of this slide is this: alignment to a broad sector alone is not sufficient. Applicants must demonstrate alignment to a specific sector objective. For example, simply saying a project relates to healthcare is not enough. Applicants need to explain how the project supports specific objectives, such as improving healthcare delivery, enhancing patient outcomes, improving system performance, or advancing medical technology. Similarly, in clean energy, applicants should demonstrate alignment to objectives like climate mitigation, critical minerals, renewable energy technologies, or sustainable resource development. The sector objective is what links the project to Nova Scotia's broader economic priorities. The handbook specifically notes that sector alignment will be assessed. We strongly encourage applicants to review the sector resources and strategies listed on the bottom of the slide when developing their EOIs. This slide addresses one of the most important concepts in E2G, end users. So end users are the bridge between research and the real-world impact. The statement of purpose defines end users and organizations and/or individuals that directly apply or implement research outputs to achieve real-world outcomes. Importantly, research peers alone are not automatically considered to be end users. Simply publishing findings for other researchers is generally not sufficient. End users might include industry, healthcare systems, government, regulators, infrastructure operators, community operators, or organizations or service providers, or even a combination of several of these entities. Strong proposals clearly identify who the end users are, and you can name them if possible, how they informed the project, why they need the outputs, and why they are positioned to adopt them if the project succeeds. This is one of the clearest indicators that a pathway to impact is credible. So next up, what does sector building mean? This is another major concept in E2G. E2G prioritizes projects where the benefits extend beyond a single organization. This does not necessarily mean that there must be many partners. A proposal can involve one organization, but the benefits must diffuse beyond that organization. Sector building occurs when research outputs become transferable assets that others can adopt, adapt, and build upon. This could include shared technologies, standards, protocols, data sets, platforms, workforce capabilities, or even new value chains. One of the strongest indicators of alignment is when applicants clearly explain how their outputs strengthen the broader ecosystem. For example, you may improve sector competitiveness, support adoption across multiple organizations, strengthen supply chains, or enable broader productivity gains. This program is intentionally designed to prioritize sector-wide benefit over isolated organizational gain. So finally, this slide addresses another important issue. E2G supports research, not routine implementation or service delivery. Projects should involve genuine uncertainty and the generation of new knowledge. Examples that may align include developing novel technologies, testing uncertain approaches, generating transferable data sets or tools, investigating unknowns systematically, or developing technologies that do not yet exist. Activities that are less likely to align with the Research Nova Scotia definition of research include routine implementation, procurement, standard operational delivery, basic adoption of existing technologies, or activities where outcomes are already known and predictable. A useful self-check is this. If a project is primarily about delivering a known solution rather than generating new knowledge or reducing uncertainty, it may not be a fit for E2G. Again, research is the engine, and economic outcomes are the destination. This slide also summarizes the 5 pillars of research that underpin the RNS definition. Projects should visibly demonstrate all 5. These principles are foundational, and even though E2G focuses heavily on economic outcomes, the work must still clearly qualify as research under the RNS definition. So now that we've established the investment philosophy behind E2G, we can shift into the practical structure of the competition itself. In this section, we'll discuss program parameters, eligibility requirements, the assessment process, and how Stage 1 fits within the broader competition. So this slide summarizes the core parameters for the Spring 2026 competition. Projects may request up to $500,000. Project duration must fall between 6 and 36 months, and the anticipated total investment pool for this competition is approximately $2 million. This slide also includes the anticipated competition timeline. The expression of interest is due on June 16th at 1 p.m. Atlantic time. Invitations to submit a full proposal are anticipated in July, and final funding decisions are anticipated in October. Applicants should review the handbook carefully for all official timelines and requirements. Applicants who name a post-secondary education institution or a health authority as their host organization are also strongly encouraged to reach out to their host as soon as possible, as there may be internal competition guidelines that will differ from those listed here. This slide summarizes the core eligibility requirements for E2G. First, project parameters. As mentioned, projects must be between 6 and 36 months and request no more than $500,000. If your request is outside of these parameters, it will automatically be deemed ineligible and will not be further considered. Second is the project leads. Project leads must be based in Nova Scotia at the time of application and throughout the project. They must demonstrate research productivity and the ability to lead high-quality research, and must be supported by an eligible host organization. Third, host organizations must be based in Nova Scotia and be capable of administering the funding and overseeing compliance. And finally, a couple of additional restrictions. A project lead may only submit one E2G application per intake, and a project lead may not hold more than one active E2G award at a time. One important reminder is that meeting the eligibility requirements listed here does not guarantee funding. Eligibility simply determines whether a project proposal can be considered, and assessment determines whether or not it should be funded. So with that, we move on to the assessment funnel. This shows how the EOI fits within the broader assessment process. The expression of interest stage is the initial screening stage. Applicants are asked to make an initial case for why the proposed research is important to Nova Scotia and to outline how it could lead to economic impact. The goal is to identify proposals that demonstrate sufficient potential to advance to the full proposal stage. At the EOI stage, the focus is not on detailed scientific methodology. Instead, the assessment focuses heavily on strategic alignment, economic potential, demand, clarity, and a credible pathway to impact. From the total applicant pool, approximately 12 to 15 projects are expected to advance to the full proposal. So the second stage, the full proposal, then expands into a much more detailed assessment. It provides the full case for investment, including the proposed impact, demand, research approach, team, budget, and overall feasibility of the project. This stage is investment focused and designed to determine whether a project represents a strong candidate for RNS support. Applicants invited to this stage will also participate in a pitch presentation. The pitch provides an opportunity to explain why the proposal represents a strong strategic investment for Nova Scotia. The audience will be RNS staff and an advisory panel who will be familiar with the written proposal. Applicants are expected to be an advocate for the proposed research and use the pitch to highlight why the proposal's most important elements, strengthen the context, and demonstrate why the project is right for investment in this round. The pitch should complement, not repeat or summarize, the written application. The pitch will be held virtually and will consist of a 5-minute presentation by the project lead, followed by up to 15 minutes of Q&A. Following that, RNS conducts an internal review and shortlisting. These shortlisted projects undergo scientific merit review. The goal of that review is to assess whether each proposal meets the appropriate standards of scientific merit. That stage is not a funding decision or a ranking exercise. It's simply a validation requirement to ensure that the research quality is sufficient to support the proposed work. And finally, up to $2 million will be distributed to selected projects in each E2G funding round. One important takeaway from this slide is to not front load your science. At the EOI stage, projects are much more likely to succeed when they clearly communicate impact, demand, value, and alignment. This slide breaks the EOI assessment into 2 parts. First is the eligibility gate. This is pass-fail. Reviewers will assess the application meets the core eligibility requirements that we just discussed. Second are the qualitative assessment criteria. These will be more judgment-based. Reviewers will consider strategic alignment, pathway to impact, demand-side interest, sector building, value, and research relevance. These 6 criteria are briefly defined on this slide, but further details for each criteria can be found in the EOI handbook. I will also ask you to notice that these criteria are heavily focused on economic outcomes, adoption, sector relevance, and impact credibility. At this stage, reviewers are not deeply evaluating detailed scientific methodology. They are assessing whether the proposal represents a credible, strategically aligned investment opportunity. In the next section, we'll move into the practical side of proposal development. We'll discuss how to structure a strong EOI and how to communicate and clearly and effectively. So the EOI really begins with a very short project summary, only 30 words maximum. This is often one of the hardest parts of the application. The formula we recommend is we are developing X to help Y achieve Z, where X is the research output, Y is the end user, and Z is the economic outcome. The key rule is clarity. Avoid jargon, avoid acronyms, avoid highly technical language. The goal is not to impress reviewers with complexity. The goal is to clearly communicate what is being developed, who benefits, and what economic change occurs. A strong elevator pitch is audience-focused, impact-focused, and understandable to a general audience. Now we'll walk through the structure of the project description section, which is the main part of your EOI submission. This is where applicants make the case for investment. Submissions should address each of the 7 sections, with each serving as a section heading. The full narrative should function as a connected pathway from sector challenge to economic impact. Applicants may use the 1,500 words available to them in whichever way makes the most sense. However, the most important sections are primary economic outcome and purpose statement, problem opportunity and knowledge gap, pathway to impact, and end users and demand signals. These are sections where reviewers are most directly assessing alignment and investment potential. Responses should be specific and evidence-based. General or unsupportive statements may be considered weak. So now we'll walk through each of these sections in a bit more detail. In this section, the first section, applicants should clearly identify which primary economic outcome the project supports. Applicants should then explain what the project's trying to achieve, how the outputs will be used, and what economic benefit could occur in Nova Scotia. One of the strongest approaches is to focus on outcomes first. Don't start with technical methodology, start with the economic change you're trying to create. In this section, applicants should identify the priority sector, the specific sector objective or objectives, and why the work matters in Nova Scotia's context. Again, naming a broad sector alone is not enough. Applicants should demonstrate why the work is timely, relevant, and strategically important. This section should explain what challenge or opportunity exists, why it matters beyond one organization, and what knowledge or capability is currently missing. Importantly, applicants should explain why research is required. Why can this not simply be solved through standard implementation or operational activity? This section is often one of the most important. Applicants should explain what outputs the project will produce, how those outputs could be used, what happens after the project, and how adoption leads to economic outcomes. This section should make the pathway visible and believable. Reviewers should be able to clearly understand how the project moves from research into real-world use. At the EOI stage, this does not need to be a full methodology section. However, applicants should still demonstrate that the project is systematic, plausible, and capable of generating transferable knowledge. Applicants should specify the key research questions and why they matter, their approach to answering these questions, the high-level work plan to answer the questions. The goal here is confidence, not exhaustive technical detail. So this section should clearly identify who the end users are, how they informed the project, what evidence demonstrates demand, and why they are positioned to adopt the outputs. Strong demand signals significantly strengthen the credibility of the pathway to impact. And finally, applicants should demonstrate that the right people and organizations are involved. This includes relevant expertise, partner contributions, operational capability, and the ability to move outputs toward adoption and impact. So in this final section, we'll focus on self-assessment and strategic fit. The goal here is to help applicants determine whether their project is truly aligned with E2G before submission. So this slide summarizes the most important strategic questions applicants should ask themselves. Is the project clearly anchored in Nova Scotia? Does the proposal prioritize measurable economic outcomes? Are the end users clearly identified? Do the benefits extend beyond one organization? And is the pathway to impact plausible and credible? Strong proposals tell a coherent story. Who benefits? What changes? Why it matters? And how impact occurs. If those pieces are not clear, the proposal will likely struggle at the EOI stage. This slide highlights a very important principle. Applicants are responsible for assessing strategic fit. Research Nova Scotia can provide clarification on program interpretation, eligibility, or application requirements. However, to ensure fairness and consistency, RNS cannot provide pre-assessment of project ideas. Alignment is assessed through the written proposal itself. As mentioned, we strongly encourage applicants to review the RNS statement of purpose, review the EOI handbook, and carefully assess how their proposal aligns to the program objectives. Both of these key documents are linked at the top of the E2G landing page on the RNS website and at the top of your application in the JURA system. This final slide highlights the projects supported through the E2G pilot round. These projects span multiple sectors and investment areas. However, they share several common characteristics. They all demonstrated clear economic outcomes, strong end user involvement, sector relevance, and credible pathways to impact. This is the common thread across successful E2G aligned investments. The projects are different scientifically, but strategically, they all aligned in the same investment logic. That is ultimately what E2G is designed to support. So that concludes the formal presentation. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this presentation and for your interest in the E2G program. We hope this session helped clarify what E2G is designed to achieve, how alignment is assessed, and how to structure a strong expression of interest. As a reminder, the EOI deadline is June 16th at 1 p.m. Atlantic time. We strongly encourage applicants to review both the EOI handbook and the Research Nova Scotia Statement of Purpose carefully as they develop their submissions. If you have clarification questions related to program interpretation or requirements, please contact apply@researchns.ca or give us a call at 902-200-8555. Thank you so much.